All right, so today we're diving into something that I think a lot of us are curious about, the genetics of longevity. Like what affects how long we live and how long we stay healthy.
Definitely something people think about a lot.
Right, and to get into it, we've got a scientific paper from the NIH called Genetics of Healthy Aging and Longevity. And then we've also got a blog post that I thought was interesting to pair with it from the One Health Trust called Promoting Healthy Aging Through Vaccinations. So we've got, on the one hand, like the DNA side of things, and on the other hand, the lifestyle side of things. And by the end, hopefully we'll have a much clearer picture of how those two things, connect and interact when it comes to aging.
Yeah, both sources really emphasize how it's not one or the other. It's this interplay between genetics and lifestyle. It's a really fascinating combination of things that determines how we age.
Yeah, and something that really stood out to me from that first article was that it said age at death and adulthood is only about 25% heritable. So that means genes play a role, but clearly not the whole story.
Absolutely. And here's where it gets even more intriguing. Even though genes might not fully dictate our lifespan, they seem to play a much bigger role when it comes to extreme longevity, like reaching 100 or older.
So it's almost like our genes have a bigger say if we're talking about becoming a centenarian.
Yeah, you could think about it that way.
What does that even mean, though, for the average person?
Well, think about it this way. Your genes provide a framework for your potential lifespan, but your lifestyle choices, those are what really fill in the details. Like, you could have a genetic predisposition towards longevity, but if you don't make healthy choices throughout your life, you might not reach that full potential.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. So are there any specific genes that researchers have been able to really pinpoint as being linked to that exceptional longevity?
There is one that consistently pops up in research. It's called the APO gene, specifically variations of it called ApoE2 and ApoE4.
ApoE. I feel like I've heard of that before. Isn't that linked to Alzheimer's disease?
Exactly. That's what makes it so fascinating. ApoE4 is associated with a high risk of Alzheimer's and also cardiovascular disease. While ApoE2 seems to have a protective effect, there was a large European study, it was called the GEH study, and they found a significant increase in the prevalence of ApoE2 among people who live to their 90s.
So then it's not as straightforward as saying ApoE2 is like the longevity gene. Is it more like a disease avoidance gene? How should someone even interpret it if they know they carry that ApoE4 variant?
That's a really important question, and it gets to the complexity of it all. It's probably a little bit of both. The ApoE gene is involved in a bunch of different biological processes, including how our bodies process fats and our inflammatory responses. All of those are key in healthy aging. If someone has the ApoE4 variant, it doesn't mean they're, like, destined for a shorter lifespan. It might mean that they want to be even more proactive about lifestyle choices that support their cardiovascular health and also their cognitive function.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually like a really empowering way to look at it, to know about your predispositions, even if they seem negative, it helps you take control. But the article also mentioned that APO is just one piece of the puzzle, right?
Exactly. There's this idea called genetic buffering that researchers are looking into more and more. Imagine, you might have some genes that increase your risk for certain diseases, but you could also have other genes that work to counteract those risks, like a built-in backup system in your DNA.
Oh, wow. So instead of thinking about good genes versus bad genes, it's more about how all these different genes interact and balance each other out.
Yeah, it's way more complicated than just one gene being good or bad.
Can you give me an example of how that would work?
Sure. The article talks about the MTP gene. It has to do with how our bodies handle fats. And some variations of that gene can be detrimental to our health. But here's the interesting part. The negative effects of those variations can be masked or neutralized by beneficial variations in other genes, like CETP, APOC3, or ADPOQ.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it's less like a solo performance and more like a whole orchestra.
A very complex orchestra, and scientists are still figuring out how to conduct it.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible to think about. All right, I'm ready for another mind-blowing fact from this article. It mentioned that centenarians, people who live to be 100 or older, often have just as many disease-associated genes as the average person. How is that even possible? Shouldn't they have, some sort of genetic advantage?
It really challenges the idea that long life just comes down to inheriting the right genes.
Right.
It's fascinating. These individuals might have exceptionally strong protective factors, both genetic and lifestyle related, that allow them to tolerate those risks.
So they might not necessarily have fewer bad genes, but they might have more of these buffering genes, or have made lifestyle choices that really mitigate those risks.
It could be a combination of things.
So then maybe, does that mean we all have the potential for a really long lifespan? And it just depends on how all of those genetic and lifestyle factors line up?
That's a really interesting thought, and it speaks to the exciting potential of this research. If we can understand how those protective factors work, both at the genetic level and the lifestyle level, that could be the key to unlocking a longer, healthier lifespan for everybody.
Wow. That kind of makes me think about that second source we have, the blog post from the One Health Trust about vaccinations. It might seem like a bit of a jump to go from talking about genes to vaccinations, but when you really think about it, even with certain genetic predispositions, our choices still have a huge impact on how we age, and vaccinations are a perfect example of that.
Absolutely. Even if we start out with a good genetic foundation, our immune systems naturally weaken as we get older. And so vaccinations become even more crucial. They act as a support system for our bodies, and they can help to prevent infections that might have a much greater impact later in life.
So it's like we're supporting those longevity genes no matter what hand we were dealt.
You could think of it that way.
That brings us back to epigenetics again, this idea that lifestyle factors can actually switch genes on or off. It still kind of blows my mind.
It is a pretty revolutionary concept. It means we're not just slaves to our DNA, the things we do, what we eat, how we manage stress, even our environment. All of that can influence how our genes actually behave. And the choices we make every day can really have an impact on how we age.
Wow. Okay, so I'm starting to see how these two sources really do connect. It's not genes or lifestyle, it's about how they work together.
Exactly. It's this intricate and complex interplay. And understanding that relationship is key to moving beyond these simplistic views of aging and embracing a more empowered approach to our health.
I like that. All right, we've already covered so much ground just in this first part of our deep dive. We've talked about how genes and lifestyle choices are, they're really intertwined. We look at that fascinating epogene and even got into that concept of genetic buffering. But we're not done yet, right?
Not even close. We're just getting started. In the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore how genetic changes that happen throughout our lives can actually impact aging. And we'll delve even deeper into the exciting world of epigenetics and how it's completely changing our understanding of longevity. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive on the genetics of longevity.
We've seen how genes and lifestyle choices, they all sort of work together to shape how we age.
Right, right. Now, I want to get into some specific areas where this interplay really becomes apparent. The NIH article mentioned something called somatic genetics. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so somatic genetics, that refers to changes that happen in our DNA after we're born. It's not the DNA that we inherit from our parents, but it's alterations that occur in our cells throughout our lives. Kind of like wear and tear on a car. Even if you start with a brand new car, over time, things start to change. Parts wear out, little dings and scratches appear.
So even if we start out with a perfect set of genes, things can still change at the cellular level as we get older.
Exactly. And actually, two large-scale analogies of data from something called genome-wide association studies, or GWAS. They found that these genomic changes, they become more common with age.
Interesting.
One specific type of change called mosaicism, and it involves these large alterations to the genome, and it seems to increase as we get older.
Okay, so that makes sense. As our cells divide and replicate over time, there's more opportunity for those, little errors or dings to occur. But how does that connect back to, the whole conversation about lifestyle and aging?
Well, this is where epigenetics kind of comes back into play. Remember those dials we were talking about earlier? The ones that control how our genes are expressed? Our lifestyle choices can directly impact the settings on those dials.
Oh, okay. So even if we experience some of these, somatic changes, we still have the power to influence how those genes behave through our choices.
Exactly. And that's what makes this so empowering. Healthy habits can significantly impact how we age, regardless of our genetic starting point, or even those changes that might happen along the way.
Wow, okay. That blog post from the One Health Trust really drove that point home when they talked about vaccinations being so important for healthy aging.
Yeah, vaccinations are a great example of how we can take these proactive steps to support our health as we get older, even when we're dealing with genetic predispositions or those acquired genetic changes. They help protect us from infections that can have a way more significant impact as we get older, especially as our immune systems naturally weaken with age.
Right, yeah. We're giving our bodies an extra layer of defense, no matter what our genes might say. The blog post also talked about, the need for better vaccination programs for adults and addressing vaccine hesitancy, which is, a huge factor in all of this.
For sure, it's crucial to remember that. Knowledge is power in this area, having access to accurate information and understand the science behind vaccinations. That's crucial for making informed choices about our health, especially as it relates to aging.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of knowledge and science, that NIH article also mentioned that whole genome sequencing is becoming a more prominent tool in longevity research. What is that exactly, and how is it, like, changing the game?
So whole genome sequencing lets scientists analyze an individual's entire genetic makeup. It's like having this high-resolution map of their DNA
Okay.
and this level of detail. It can reveal variations and patterns that we might not have been able to detect before in these traditional genetic
So
studies.
we're going beyond just looking at individual genes like APO. We're zooming out to see, like, the entire landscape.
Exactly. And this is where things get really exciting. Researchers are actually using whole genome sequencing to pinpoint rare variants that might be associated with exceptional longevity.
It's like searching for a needle in a haystack with with a much stronger magnet. What are they hoping to find by looking at those rare variants?
Well, they think these rare variants could be the key to understanding why some people age more gracefully than others. It's not just about the presence or absence of certain genes, but it's the unique combinations and subtle variations that make each person's genetic makeup unique.
So it's like everyone has their own, like, personal longevity recipe written in their DNA, and whole genome sequencing is helping us decipher those recipes.
That's a great way to put it. The more we can learn about those individual variations, the closer we'll get to understanding that complex dance between our genes, our lifestyle, and longevity.
Okay, this is all incredibly fascinating, but I have to admit, one thing that's still a little bit of a mystery to me is the concept of telomeres. The article touched on them briefly, but I'd love to understand their role in aging a little better.
Sure. So telomeres are like the protective caps at the ends of our chromosomes. Think of them like the little plastic tips on your shoelaces that prevent them from fraying.
Okay.
They basically play this critical role in keeping our DNA intact and stable.
Oh, so they protect our DNA from damage. How does that relate to aging, though?
So here's the thing. Telomeres, they naturally shorten as we age. Every time a cell divides, a little piece of that telomere is lost. It's kind of like a biological clock kicking away inside our cells.
So shorter telomeres mean older cells.
Essentially, yeah. And as those telomeres get shorter and shorter, they become less effective at protecting the DNA, which can lead to cellular damage and aging.
Okay, so is there anything we can do to, like, slow down that telomere shortening or even lengthen them?
That's a great question, and it's something that scientists are actively researching. There is some really promising research that suggests that. Lifestyle factors like diet and exercise, stress management, they can actually influence telomere length.
So just like with those somatic genetic changes we were talking about earlier, it's not that we have complete control over how our telomeres shorten, but we can potentially influence the rate at which it happens through our choices.
Exactly. It's like taking good care of your shoelaces so they last longer. And that brings us right back to that central theme of this whole deep dive, the interplay between our genes and our lifestyle choices.
Yeah, we've covered a lot in the second part. We've explored the impact of, genetic changes that happen throughout our lives. We talked about epigenetics and even got into the world of telomeres. But I have a feeling there's still one more piece of the puzzle.
Yes, there is. In the final part of our deep dive, we're going to tie all of these threads together and explore what this research really means for our understanding of human potential and the future of aging.
All right, so welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the genetics of longevity. We've been exploring this fascinating world of, like, genes and lifestyle and how they all come together to, impact how we age. But what's the big takeaway here? What does all this research really tell us?
Well, I think one of the most important things to remember is that we're not just passive passengers, on the genetic journey. We actually have a lot more influence over how we age than we think.
Right, we've been talking about how it's not just about the genes we inherit, but it's also about those choices we make throughout our lives, like diet and exercise, stress management, even our social connections, all that stuff can really impact how our genes express themselves.
Exactly, and that's where epigenetics comes in, the idea that our lifestyle can actually switch genes on or off. It's pretty amazing. It's really revolutionizing the way we think about that connection between our genes and our environment.
Yeah, so it's almost like we have this set of genetic dials, and we can actually adjust them through our daily habits. That's a pretty empowering way to think about aging.
It really is, and it really highlights the importance of those preventative measures we've been discussing. Things like vaccinations. They can provide that extra layer of support for our bodies, especially as we get older and our immune systems naturally weaken.
Yeah, like we're giving our bodies that helping hand no matter what our genes might be saying. And this kind of brings us back to those centenarians you were talking about. They're like living proof that a long and healthy life is totally possible, even for those of us who maybe didn't win the genetic lottery, so to speak.
I know, it's pretty amazing how resilient they are. And it's not just about living a long life, it's about living well. A lot of them are active and engaged in their communities well into their 90s and even beyond.
That's incredible. And they're not doing it with some kind of superhuman genetic profile either. They're really demonstrating what's possible when we make those choices that support healthy aging, both physically and mentally. So what can we really learn from them?
Well, I think the big thing is that we all have the potential for that resilience. And that resilience comes from a combination of factors, our genetic predisposition and our lifestyle choices. It's not about being perfect. It's about understanding our strengths and our weaknesses and making choices that really support our overall well-being.
I like that. We've also been talking about that whole genome sequencing and how it's becoming, more and more powerful. How do you see that technology shaping the future of longevity research?
Whole genome sequencing is giving us this incredible look at the intricate details of our DNA. And as it becomes more accessible, we'll be able to really identify those subtle variations that might be contributing to, exceptional aging.
So that could lead to more personalized approaches to healthcare, helping people make choices that are tailored to their specific genetic makeup.
Exactly.
Wow. Do you think it could eventually help us unlock even more secrets about longevity?
Oh, absolutely. I think it has the potential to totally change how we approach aging and healthcare. We're starting to move beyond those simplistic views, and we're embracing the complexity of this interplay between genes and lifestyle and longevity. Imagine the future where we can use our genetic information to really guide our choices, optimize our health, and maybe even extend our lifespans.
Yeah, it's a future I can get behind. It's full of some pretty amazing possibilities. As we wrap up this deep dive, I think the biggest takeaway for me is that we're not just passive recipients of our genes. We can actively shape how we age.
That's such an important thing to remember. Every time you go for a walk or eat a healthy meal, connect with loved ones. You're not just taking care of your body and mind. You're actually influencing how your genes express themselves. And you're shaping your own longevity story.
It's incredible to think about, really. We're all active participants in this, like, dance of life, and with a little understanding of the science and, a lot of conscious choices. We can all strive to live longer, healthier, and more fulfilling lives. That's it for our deep dive into the genetics of longevity. Thanks for joining us.